The train chugged into Red Rock with a scream of steel and a sigh of steam, unsettling the dust that clung to every weathered surface of the tiny frontier town. It was late afternoon, and the sun had begun its slow descent behind the buttes, casting long shadows like fingers reaching across the earth. Folks emerged from shops and porches to watch the rare arrival. A letter had gone out months ago, and now the answer had come by rail. Clara Whitlock stepped down from the last car, her gloved hands tight around the handle of a modest carpetbag. Her figure was slender but upright, dressed plainly, bonnet drawn low. The lace at her collar was yellowed with time, but pressed with care. She walked with precision, measured, but not timid, as though she'd memorized each step before taking it. The townspeople murmured. No one welcomed her. Elijah Tanner stood near the station, arms folded, soot staining his apron. The blacksmith was built like an anvil and just as warm. His eyes narrowed as Clara approached, then widened slightly when he saw her face beneath the bonnet. A jagged scar ran from the corner of her right eye to the curve of her jaw, pulling at the skin like an old seam. The rest of her face was delicate, fine-boned, with eyes a startling blue, but the scar overtook all else. He didn't say a word, just spat, turned his back, and walked away. Clara stood frozen. The conductor shifted awkwardly. A boy giggled. Somewhere a woman whispered, "Shame he didn't ask for a picture." Her eyes didn't well with tears. She didn't flinch. She only turned, step by step, and walked past the staring crowd, her boots silent on the boards. She found lodging in an abandoned house on the edge of town, a sagging frame that once belonged to a trapper no one remembered. The roof leaked, the floor slanted, and the back door hung open like a broken jaw. But it was shelter. She lit no lamp, cooked over a small fire, and scrubbed the place with lie and stubbornness until the rot gave up. At night, she'd sit on the porch and look out at the land, hard, dry, endless. Children dared each other to creep near and toss rocks at her gate. Witch woman, they called her. One brave boy threw a stone that struck her shoulder. She stood, turned slowly, and walked toward him. He ran before she could speak, tripping over his own feet. She never raised her voice. She never told. The women of Red Rock avoided her, as though her presence might spread. The men joked in hushed tones. The preacher offered a forced smile on Sundays, but she never went. She worked instead, chopping, tilling, repairing. She bought seeds with what little money she had left and planted them with bare hands and a desperate hope. They grew slowly, like her place in the town's silence. In the saloon, stories drifted over whiskey. One man spoke of a stranger who watched from the canyon's edge. Killian Graves. Someone muttered, and the room went still. A ghost, a gunman, a man with a past darker than a cave in winter. Some said he once gunned down 6 men for burning a church. Others claimed he buried his own brother for wearing a badge. None agreed, but all agreed on one thing. He was dangerous, and he lived alone. He came into town only when needed, boots heavy on the boardwalk, hat low over eyes the color of ash. The sheriff once tried to ask where he'd come from. Killian had looked at him, then past him, and the sheriff never asked again. Weeks passed. The scarred woman worked, and the town watched. Elijah married another, a plump-faced girl from Clifton. The preacher blessed it as the right match, and no one mentioned the one he'd left at the station. Clara bore it all in silence. But something shifted. One morning, a child wandered to her gate again, this time with a scraped knee. He said nothing. Clara beckoned, cleaned the wound, wrapped it gently. Word got around. Another child came, then an old widow, curious about her tomatoes. Clara offered seeds. Quietly, without consent, she began to be known. The blacksmith caught sight of her once, arm deep in the belly of a broken plow, hair tied back, hands dark with grease. He spat again. "You think she'll last winter?" someone asked. "She's still here, ain't she?" someone else replied. One evening, just after sunset, as the wind carried the scent of sage and coming rain, Clara stood behind her small house, examining the fence. A shadow moved in the distance, tall, slow, deliberate. She turned. A man approached, all in black, with a wide-brimmed hat and a Colt on his hip. Killian Graves. He stopped just outside the fence. For a long moment, Neither spoke. Then, in a voice rough as gravel, he said, "You got something worth guarding." Clara met his gaze. "Then I suppose I'll guard it." He nodded once, then turned and walked away. The night fell quickly. The stars came out like sparks over the buttes. Inside her small home, Clara sat in the stillness, a rifle across her lap, and listened to the wind. Something had changed. Not in them. In her. The summer deepened into heat. Red Rock baked beneath an unflinching sun, its dirt roads cracked and brittle, its people quicker to temper. Clara kept her eyes down and her hands busy. She rose before the light and worked until dusk, her garden swelling with squash and corn, her chickens laying steady. The house that once sagged now stood upright, patched with cedar boards and a new door she'd carved herself. She hauled her own water, fixed her own fence, and spoke only when necessary. Some began to nod in passing. The widow Arnsby, half-blind and widowed since the cholera winter, stumbled on her porch step one morning. Clara was there by noon, hammer in hand. She mended the rail, set the post straight, and stayed long enough to ladle stew into a bowl. No words of thanks were needed. The next day, a loaf of cornbread appeared on Clara's porch, wrapped in cloth. Small things, but they added weight to her presence. Still, others watched with narrowed eyes. Elijah Tanner's most of all. One afternoon, Clara crossed paths with him at the general store. He'd grown heavier, chin thickened with ale and pride. He saw her by the barrels of flour, his new wife giggling near the counter. "Should have sent a return address," he said loudly. "Might have saved us both the waste." She didn't answer. She picked up her sack and moved past him like he was dust. The silence held. Trouble didn't ride in with warning. It came in whispers first, tales from passing riders, black smoke seen from the North Ridge, a farmstead found scorched with no sign of life. The Miller gang, known for burning out settlements along the San Juan Trail, taking what they wanted and leaving graves behind. No law held them. No mercy slowed them. Sheriff Dolan posted notices. "Be cautious," they said. "Stay close." But the sheriff was old and crooked in the back, and his deputies were boys too eager or too scared. The town began to fray at its seams. Men spoke in hushed tones. Women sent letters to distant cousins. The preacher started holding services twice a week, as though faith alone could guard the door. One evening, Clara stood outside her fence, watching a hawk circle high above the buttes. Across the slope, a figure emerged, Killian Graves, silent and sure as ever. He didn't speak until he reached the gate. "They're coming," he said. "Few days, maybe less." She nodded, as if she already knew. "You could leave," he added. "Still time." Clara looked past him, to the town tucked between the rocks and dust. "No," she said. "I've done enough running." Killian studied her, eyes sharp beneath his hat. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a bundle wrapped in oiled cloth. A rifle, old but clean, the stock dark with polish. "Yours?" she asked. "No," he said. "Yours." Clara took it, held its weight, and felt something inside her settle. The next day, Killian rode into town. Men stiffened. Conversations stopped. He went to the gunsmith, ordered a box of cartridges, and paid in gold coin. At the saloon, he drank one glass of water, said nothing, and left. "Who's he guarding?" the barkeep muttered. "Not guarding," someone else replied. "Joining." As the threat grew nearer, Clara's presence shifted from tolerated to needed. She organized the women to store dry goods, taught them how to bind wounds with boiled linen, showed them how to boil creek water in case the wells were cut. Children gathered on her porch in the evenings, listening to her tell tales from the war. Not the battles, but the recoveries. Her voice, always steady, gave them shape. On the third morning, Elijah Tanner stood outside her gate. She opened the door with the rifle resting beside her. He raised his hands. "Heard you've got folk listening. People think you're someone worth following." Clara said nothing. He shifted his weight. "You planning to lead us, then? Scarred bride come to save Red Rock." Her gaze didn't waver. "Planning to survive. Anyone else who wants to is welcome." His lip curled, but he said no more. That night, the town gathered inside the church. benches packed tight, air thick with fear. Sheriff Dolan stood up front, trembling slightly. "We can't outgun him," he said. "We don't have the men. Maybe if we offer what's in the safe." "No," Clara said, rising from the back. All heads turned. She walked to the front, the oiled rifle slung over her shoulder. Her face caught the lantern light, scar and all. "You give them what they want," she said, "and they'll still burn it down. That's what men like that do. You want to live, you fight. Not with pride. With purpose." There was a long, thick silence. Then Killian's voice came from a shadowed pew. "She knows what's coming better than any of us." He stood beside her. "You follow anyone," he said. "You follow her." The sheriff stepped back. No one stopped him. When the church emptied, a dozen stayed behind. Men, women, even a few older children. They looked to Clara for what came next. She gave them orders, clear and quick. Where to place barrels, how to set traps, which buildings to reinforce. As they dispersed into the night, she stood alone for a moment under the stars. She thought of the train, of the faces that turned from her, of the boy who'd thrown that stone. And then she looked toward the hills, where fires would soon rise. She didn't smile, but she didn't blink either. They came with a morning mist, riding low in the saddle, 13 shadows moving through the canyon like wolves. The Miller gang didn't charge. They didn't hoot or holler. They advanced with calm assurance, knowing fear traveled faster than bullets. Smoke from their campfires had already warned the town. Red Rock had time to brace, but not much. Clara crouched behind a stacked wall of crates near the mercantile, rifle steady, breath measured. Across from her, Killian lay in wait behind the church's stone steps, eyes narrowed beneath his hat. The others, those brave enough to stay, were hidden across rooftops and behind barrels, nerves tight as bowstrings. Elijah Tanners had taken up position with 2 others near the livery, jaw clenched, palms sweaty around a shotgun he'd barely practiced with. A child watched from the second-story window of the boarding house, clutching a cloth rabbit. The gang paused at the edge of town. Their leader, Amos Miller, pushed his wide-brimmed hat up to reveal a sunburned face and pale eyes. He grinned. "Red Rock," he called. "You've got one chance to open your doors and hand over what's worth talking. Otherwise, we help ourselves." No one answered. "All right then," Amos said, and raised his hand. The first gunshot cracked the silence like a whip. Clara had fired, straight through the chest of the rider beside Amos. The outlaw fell sideways without a sound. Chaos followed. Gunfire erupted across the street, echoing off the canyon walls. Horses screamed. Windows shattered. The Miller gang surged forward, fanning out like a flood. But they met traps, ropes that snapped taut, barrels that rolled into hooves, shards of glass in the alley dirt. Clara didn't move from her post. She worked the bolt of the rifle with mechanical calm, each shot purposeful. When one outlaw tried to flank from the saloon side, she pivoted, exhaled, and put a round through his thigh. He screamed and crawled until Killian finished the job with quiet finality. At the livery, Elijah's nerves cracked. He fired too soon, missed his mark, and took a bullet to the shoulder. He dropped to the ground, wailing. Clara saw it happen and clenched her jaw. "They're pushing west," someone shouted. "Fall back to the blacksmiths," she ordered. Those who could moved quickly, dragging Elijah with them, leaving streaks of blood on the dry earth. The battle funneled into the tighter alleys near the forge. Smoke rose as one of the Miller men set fire to a shed. Flames licked at the wood, casting flickering light on panicked faces. Clara reloaded behind a stack of horseshoes. Her hands trembled briefly, then steadied. She stood and fired at a silhouette near the smoke, then ducked again as bullets bit into the wall behind her. Across the yard, Killian stalked through the haze like a phantom, moving with lethal precision. He didn't fire wildly. Every shot was chosen. When he reached the center of town, he found Amos Miller dismounting, revolvers in both hands, laughing. "That her?" Amos said, glancing toward Clara. "The bride with the scar?" Killian didn't answer. "Hell," Amos said. "She's got grit. Almost a shame." "She's not your shame to carry," Killian replied, raising his gun. Amos fired first. The blast caught Killian in the side, spinning him backwards. He fell hard, dust clouding around him. Clara saw it happen, and something in her heart twisted. Not panic, not grief, but fire. She rose, rifle raised, walking toward Amos like she'd trained for this moment all her life. He turned at the sound of her boots. "Well now," he said, cocking his second pistol. "Here you are." She didn't answer. She fired. The bullet took him high in the chest, knocking him back against a hitching post. He gasped once, blood blooming through his vest like red flowers. His gun clattered to the dirt. For a second, the battlefield stilled. Then the Miller gang scattered. One man dropped his weapon and fled into the hills. Another was pulled from his horse and pinned by townsfolk. The rest were either down or running. It was over as quickly as it had begun. Smoke curled into the pale sky. Flames smoldered at the shed's edge. The town groaned and exhaled as if waking from a nightmare. Clara walked to Killian, who lay propped against the side of the forge. Blood soaked his shirt, but his eyes were still sharp. "You still standing?" he rasped. "Barely," she replied, kneeling. "You led them." "I didn't have a choice." He grinned faintly. "Sure you did. You just made the right one." She pressed a cloth to his wound, hand firm. Around them, townsfolk began to gather. Not with suspicion, not with whispers, with awe. The preacher knelt and crossed himself. The widow Arnsby offered water. Even Elijah, now bandaged and pale, limped closer with downcast eyes. Clara didn't bask. She stayed at Killian's side, eyes watchful. The threat had passed, but judgment lingered. Not from the gang, not from the heavens, but from the people who had once turned their backs, and now looked upon her with something else, something like hope.